Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hello again. Welcome back to the Near Memo with David, Mike, and Greg, where we talk about all things local, search, social, and commerce. And this is episode 108, another in a series of milestones for us. And today we'll be talking about what else? AI and Google and Bard. We're also going to be talking about Wix's new integration of AI as a content generation tool, and finally, GM's deal with Google that ousts CarPlay and Android Auto. But what is GM doing, and why, and what is the outlook for that? So I'm gonna launch us off today with a kind of hybrid but coherent, hopefully, topic around Google's decision to merge its Bard unit or the teams into its assistant group, which I think is the right decision and pretty interesting. And it kind of renews, in my mind, the promise of the virtual assistant or the whatever we want to call it now, the AI assistant or the conversational AI. These assistants, that Siri, Cortana, Bixby, Google Assistant, Alexa, of course, they all had enormous promise and hype at the beginning when they launched several years ago. And none of them have really delivered. None of them have lived up to the promise that was initially kind of, held out, that this was kind of and Google explicitly presented this as a kind of successor to search at Google I/O, its developer company. This is like the next generation of our search experience plus these other capabilities. And they just, for reasons that are technical and other reasons, which we won't go into, they just never kind of fulfilled that promise. And I think now, with the capabilities of ChatGPT and similar products, Google's, various large language models, there's some new hope for really doing some interesting things with those products. David, you want to say something? You're in agreement?
Well, what I wanted to say is that the limit to these products has, both in terms of how users interact with them, in terms of what they can do, is limited by the specific commands that they have to be trained on to function. And what AI opens is an infinite world of commands, right, and natural language, both in and out.
Language, right.
True natural language in and out. And that opens up things that we're seeing, like with ChatGPT, the plugins, where all of a sudden they'll be able to solve sort of complex travel queries and find you an air flight that leaves between 1 and 3 on a Saturday and doesn't stop anyplace, kind of queries. And I think that if they can train these things properly, it has a lot of potential. I read Apple was actually exploring something similar for Siri to move it beyond the sort of limits of its own lack of understanding of reality.
The failure of Alexa in particular, right, is due to the lack of discoverability of skills. And as Mike just said, this, ChatGPT, AI, Bard, they all just sort of sweep that aside because you don't need to know about a particular skill. You just tell it what you want it to do and it does it. And so I think that there's, as somebody who's probably the thing that I've been most wrong about in my entire career, I was pretty hot on the voice search bandwagon. Looks like I may end up winning the bet, but only about 4 to 6 years too late. So,
well, that's exactly right. That's always the case. Is like people make assumptions about there's the quote that's misattributed to Bill Gates about we overestimate the amount of change in 1 year and underestimate the amount of change in 5 years or whatever.
Right.
Paraphrasing. I don't think you were wrong in expecting a lot of voice search, and it just made sense for lots of reasons. But
I thought he was wrong at the time.
Well, the technology never caught up. It never improved. I mean, we had this very promising start, and then it just kind of didn't really go anywhere. It plateaued. And so
this is the quantum leap to take it to actual usability the last 6 months or so. Yeah,
that's right. And there's still barriers and obstacles, but I think that there's now kind of some of the challenges have been removed, and data becomes very, very important, as Mike, you alluded to. having the right data sets. I mean, Google has an enormous local knowledge graph that it could really bring to bear on local search issues. And there's no reason why they, I mean, other than their business model, which is a major problem, there's no reason why they couldn't bring that to bear and really deliver a great sort of voice assistant local search experience. There's the issue of the screen and how much information you can kind of consume via an audio output. But I think that this is a kind of an exciting development. And just to add on to that, the Wall Street Journal reported, I think, based on an interview with Sundar Pichai. I haven't read the article yet, but the headline is basically Google has publicly said we are going to integrate Bard into search, similar to what Microsoft has done. What that looks like will remains to be seen. But right now, the two of them are quite separate. You can initiate a Google search from Bard, but Bard is nowhere on the Google, kind of UI. So that'll be very interesting to see.
And I'm still in the camp of, I think that there are going to be use cases for Bard that are substantially different from our use case of Google today, where I think it will absolutely succeed or any chat AI tool, but specific to Google, there are instances where it's just a better UI to the extent that it is a UI. But I think for the preponderance of my daily searching anyway, a traditional search engine still works better. I don't. What we were going back and forth yesterday on Slack, Greg, that one of the things that Perplexity AI has going for it, which I don't think Bard or ChatGPT or Bing GPT has going for it, is speed. You can type something into Perplexity and it gives you an answer instantly. And generally the answer is a little bit shorter. They actually have a toggle where you can get a sort of snippet versus the full tome. And so I think that if the chat tools continue to evolve in that manner where they're able to give shorter and shorter answers, I think there is a possibility where they could start to displace some of my traditional searches. But until they do, I think I'm going to live in this mental model of, do I have this sort of complex question that's not really, where I'm not really looking for a search result? In that case, I'll probably use a chatbot. But if I'm just looking for lunch near me or, hardware stores open now, those kinds of searches, I'm still going to use Google largely and or Apple Maps. So
right, and the last point I would make before we move on to your discussion about Wix, David, is I'm doing something similar now, which is like I used to just pretty much exclusively use Google, a little bit of DuckDuckGo, and now I'm doing a bunch of different things. And so I asked people on Twitter and LinkedIn the identical question just to sort of get as many responses as I could. Given all these options now, what are you doing? Are you still using Google exclusively or 99%? Are you using other things in tandem with Google? Have you stopped using Google? And this is not a representative audience of the larger population, but there were about
not 300.
At all. Yeah, well, but
you guys are special. You guys are special unicorns. Anybody following us or listening to this podcast?
Well, so Barry retweeted it, so it got some broader distribution. Barry Schwartz, but basically, these are insiders of one sort or another on both of these platforms, and they said, it was something like. Now I'm forgetting the precise numbers, but it was like 68% were still using Google 99% of the time, and then 32% were using other stuff. Most of those people were using Google and something else, and then 8% had said they moved on from Google. And of course, that's not going to be representative of, if you ask people at large, what are you using? It's going to be all Google, and then there'll be a few outliers doing other things. But it does suggest that there's now some movement, like what you were talking about. Things have opened up, and people are now kind of doing different things than they used to do, which I think is interesting and encouraging, because what we need in the search market is more competition for multiple reasons. And so anyway,
I do think it puts the pressure on Google a little bit to deliver the right search result the first time you search, because now, whereas before you would probably just keep refining your query and refining your query and refining your query on Google. And now I think there's more likelihood that if you get a unsatisfactory first result from Google, that you're like, oh, well, let me try that search somewhere else. And so I think that is I think my default behavior is still going to be Google, but
Yeah.
if I don't get what I want the first time, I am more likely to try a different platform.
Well, and that's what caused me to write that article, Breaking the Google Habit on our site, is that I was reading a Media Post piece. I wanted to see the report. I typed in the title of the report and the company
in
that
quotes,
generated it.
In quotes, you used an advanced operator.
All right. So mea culpa, but nonetheless, Google should have found that report, and it did not. It gave me the article that I had already read. And so I thought, to your point, I thought, oh, I'll try something else. And I went to Perplexity just for the hell of it, and it found the article, and that was really striking to me. It's a very isolated example, unfair to generalize, but I thought, wow, this is interesting, and it reinforces this sort of outside lookup behavior. So let's move on to you, David.
Before you do, I just have one thought, and it's more of a question. And it's that when do agencies and businesses need to revisit their attitude towards Bing and integrate that whatever into their marketing plans, right? I mean, it's like there's this functional question that comes from this that you have to address. And interestingly, looking at these results, like Bing is using Facebook reviews and TripAdvisor reviews and Yelp reviews now, and it may be that businesses should be thinking about Yelp, TripAdvisor, and Facebook reviews once again, or when should they?
I think that's a tough question, because you're still looking at a kind of 80-20 or 90-10 situation where most of your effort really should be focused on Google, because that's the dominant use case. But for people that have bandwidth, it's worth exploring and going beyond. But for local businesses, for small businesses, for those that don't have agencies working on their behalf or a lot of resources, makes no sense at this point. But at some point it may.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.